is both a physical and, you may say, a moral lawgiver. I know why our rationality can comprehend the universe out there. It's because we are created in God's image. We have a stamp of that divine rationality. So quite apart from our physical nature, formed, I agree, by evolution, we have a moral and a rational nature that allows us, one may say, to go beyond survival and understand truth. Truth that is more than sending my genes into the next generation. I've spoken a little bit about science. How am I on time? I've got 10 more minutes. Okay. I think I can do some more damage. I want to shift a little bit. I want to shift a little bit away from... I focused a little bit on nature. I want to talk a little bit more now about human nature. Because there is actually an argument for God that doesn't simply require us to contemplate the cosmos. In a sense, it is standing right in front of us. Or to put it somewhat differently, it can be seen by looking a little bit in the mirror. And that is, when we look at nature... Let me clarify before I move on. I would agree with Dan that religion, by which I mean the various cultural, human descriptions of God, are to a large degree man-made. After all, we are dealing with a sphere of experience, or we are dealing with a sphere of truth that lies beyond human experience. I think really, in some senses in this debate, both Dan and I are, in some senses, a specialized sense, we are both agnostics. And what I mean by that is we are debating a question for which there is not and cannot really be decisive empirical evidence. If I were to say to you, is there life after death? How could we figure this out? Dan might say, well, I don't see any evidence that it's so. Well, what kind of evidence are you waiting for? You want dead people to come back to life and stand up in court and give testimony? Is that what you're waiting for? Then you'll believe? No. All right. So Dan is exactly in the position of that caveman circa 5,000 BC or 10,000 BC, whose whole world was limited to 2 miles from where he was born, and decided on the basis of rational evidence that there could be nothing else out there. Why? Because his little instruments couldn't see them. In other words, how hubristic and narrow-minded of us to assume that all the available information we have now, that's it. That's all we know. And what we don't know can't possibly exist. It's ridiculous. It would have been absurd if we had believed that in the past. Imagine if other scientists had believed that 500 years ago. We deny the existence of all planets outside our solar system. Why? We've seen no evidence of them. This is Dan Dennett circa about 1450. All right. Here's the point I want to get at. We have nature, but we also have human nature, and that's us. And we know that although we are part of nature, we are made up of atoms and molecules, we are a little different than the rest of nature in one key respect. Take a stone rolling down a hill. A stone, quite frankly, has no choice in the matter. The stone rolls. It is a product of nature. We, on the other hand, seem to exist in 2 dimensions. We are products of nature, but we are also products ultimately of free will, of choice, of intentionality, of feelings, of consciousness, of morality. Now I ask you, where can those things be found under the microscope? Have you ever seen consciousness? No. Dan Dennett argues, because he can't see it, it doesn't exist. It's kind of an illusion. It's ultimately a sort of projection or epiphenomenon of material things. Everything has to be reduced to the material. Why? Because ultimately our great wide universe has to be truncated in a Procrustean way to make it fit with materialist morality. Half of our experience, the entire subjective dimension, has to be cancelled out. So for Dan, if a computer can process a transaction, and you can process a transaction, hey, the computer is being rational. The computer is human in some fundamental sense, no different from you. And why? Because the result is the same. Now, I think this is a bit of foolishness that it really perhaps takes a non-academic to see. In other words, we have knowledge of nature not just from the outside. We are like stones. But we also have choice. Here I am participating in this debate, and our debate is based on free exchange of ideas and free will. I mean, I could put this microphone down and go sit down. Is the firing of my neurons in my head determining my decision? Is it telling me one way or the other? No, I can go either way. I speak, I stop. So the dimension of free will would seem to suggest that there is a part of us that one may say can override the laws of nature. Now, in what way? Obviously, if I throw this microphone, its trajectory, its parabola-like motion, it will fall to the ground in obedience to the laws of gravity. I admit all that. But my decision to throw it, I would suggest, is undetermined. And why? Think about it. Imagine if all our actions were determined. If that were true, there would be no point in having this debate. There would be no point in us having universities. There would be no point in having morality, because you could never just say to someone, you shouldn't do this, you mustn't do that, this isn't right, because they would answer, what choice do I have in the matter? You can't go to Hitler or the Nazis and say, you shouldn't wipe out an entire population, because they would say, well, my neurons made me do it. Ultimately, I want to suggest that this materialist morality, and Dan is about as clever as anyone in camouflaging it, disguising it, trying to show that ultimately he does believe in consciousness even though he defines it differently. He does believe in free will even though he defines it differently. Everything is ultimately defined differently. And why? To fit in with this narrow materialist morality. And this brings me really to a key question. Why would anyone be attracted to a metaphysics that ultimately denies, if you will, half of our humanity? The whole subjective dimension, the whole moral dimension. I want to suggest ultimately that atheism is not even so much an intellectual revolt. Because think about it. When it comes to God, I would agree, I don't know that God exists. I believe that he does. Now, knowledge is not the same thing as belief. I wouldn't say I believe in my brother. I know the guy. You only believe when you don't know. So here's the difference. I don't know, and still I believe. Dan doesn't know, and therefore he doesn't believe. What unites us is both of us don't know. We're actually both ignorant. The only difference is Dan thinks he's a champion of reason, and I'm a champion of blind faith. No, we are both reasoning in the dark. The only difference is he won't admit it. I am saying that ultimately the decision to embrace God is not even just a matter of reason. It's ultimately also a matter of choice. And why? The reason was given by Pascal. He said a long time ago that there are some things in life for which you'll never have the evidence. You've dated a woman. You've gone out with her for 5 years, 10 years. I submit that there's no amount of dating that can convince you what life with her will be like for the next 50 years. There's no way to know. So you could say, well, you know what, I'm going to be an agnostic. I'm going to wait for the data to come in. Well, if you're an agnostic in that sense, she will marry someone else, or you will both be dead. You ultimately have to decide based on what you know whether you should propose, whether you should go for it. You've got to ultimately make that rational step. So faith is involved. But I'm suggesting that from the outset, it is a rational faith grounded in science, grounded in evidence, grounded in experience, and ultimately asking, what kind of society do we want to be part of? Is there a reason to believe in a transcendent basis for the world? How did it come to be? For us, why are we here? At the end of the day, this is a matter of what Pascal called the wager. And by the wager, what he meant was you can bet on God. And he said, if you're wrong, what's going to happen? Well, you've made a metaphysical mistake. On the other hand, you can bet against God. And if you're wrong, alas, you will be separated from God. Not by his choice, by the way, by yours. You are cutting yourself off from God. And Pascal's point is, why would any rational person choose against God? If you choose against him, you lose nothing. If you choose for him, you have the prospect